Alright guys, so we're back here at the house and we're going to go ahead and get these pictures dumped onto my computer and dive into step number 2 of creating a panoramic photo and what that entails. Now, this part will mostly be my screen, so today's episode is going to be predominantly me working on the computer. I don't really have an easy way to splice in yet because I just haven't taken the time to learn it and been really crunched on time how to shoot video and splice in the screen work. So I'm going to do my best to kind of jump between the two a little bit, but more often than not what you're going to see is probably just me on the screen. But let's dive in and take a look at what the process is going to look like to create these panoramic photos that we've got on the camera and stitch them all together and put them all into one final image here. So let's dive into it. Okay guys, so here we are, we're in Lightroom, and basically what I've done is I've taken all of the images that I shot from this panoramic tutorial, I guess you will, and I've put them all into their own folder so they're easy to find. Now I've gone ahead and tossed out the images that I took to signify the start and end of the panoramic series, and may or may not have been a smart thing, but I've got 3 different ones in here, and so I think we're okay. So the first thing I wanted to show you, and in case some of you are wondering, is why wouldn't you just take a picture of the same scene with a wider angle lens? And this is the best example why. Here's a example of that very same scene that we were taking the panoramic photo of. Now you can see there's a lot of the distortion and everything else, which actually is pretty cool because it kind of gives a real big feeling to the image. And we've talked about that on the recent episode of Shutter Time I was on with Sid and Mac, that feeling of bigness can really just lend a totally different vibe or a totally different mood to an image. Now, some people will go in and take a scene like this. They may want to correct it. Not a big deal, but you could try and correct that. But you see the tree right here that we were going to try and feature. It's way buried in there, and it's such a small detail in the scene, and so there is a bit of a difference in perspective. So I don't want to waste any more time with that. What I've done, this is the first image that we're going to create, and this is the one I took. Ended up being 4 images wide to try and create a very traditional panoramic photo. Now, this scene isn't going to be as wide as it looks because it's going to be a lot of overlap on these, and so hopefully if I've done what I needed to correctly, it will go ahead and stitch these together and turn them into something that's just a nice solid image. Now what I've done, I've gone ahead and done my corrections on the first image and made sure I've applied the same settings to each one, which is important because you want all of your images to match. So make all of your main adjustments to exposure and contrast and your black points, all of that stuff first. And that way you're going to save yourself a little bit of a headache when this comes out. Now there's a couple ways to do this. I'm going to show you here in Lightroom. You can also do it in Photoshop, which I will often do. And there's a lot of free programs out there like GIMP, which is a Photoshop type of program, but it's free to use. There's also one I believe is still around. I think it was called Microsoft Ice. I could be wrong on that name, but that's just a strictly panoramic photo stitching tool. Excuse me, that's a tongue twister. And it worked really well. It was really quick. But for me, now that Lightroom has stepped up its game so much and it's doing such a really good job of doing the stitching, I'm going to do it right in here. So all you'll do is just right click, select your images first, right click on one of them, go to Photo Merge and choose Panorama. And so it's going to go ahead and create this preview, and this might take a second, so we're just going to skip ahead, and when this is ready I'll be right back. Okay guys, so Lightroom has done its thing and it's gone ahead and stitched this photograph together for us. Now you'll see there's a few different options up here for how it wants to put this together. By default it went to perspective, and I have it set to automatically crop. The reason I do that is because if I uncheck that, you see all of these. That's just where I was sloppy putting my picture together and starting on the left up here, and each one got progressively lower. and created that kind of jaggy image, because the real image would be out here with that white part on there. I will set it to auto crop, which is going to automatically take in all of that detail information and give me just what's there that's not jagged or edgy. Now, choosing some of these different modes, you can see how it will alter the way the scene looks a little bit, because it's trying to wrap these images in and correct not just for the stacking and stitching together of the photos, but as far as the perspective controls that it gives to help control some of the distortions. Now, the perspective control here, you know, it's okay, but I don't really care for this because there's a little bit of this weird effect that's happening here where it's kind of stretching. I think for me, the one I like the most is the straight spherical perspective, and I'll probably have to go in and just do a little bit of a rotation, maybe not much actually. It looks all right, but the scene kind of just flows off here. Now, is this a groundbreakingly amazing panorama? No, it's just a good example here. So it's going to create that, and the nice thing is with Lightroom, when you do it right in Lightroom like this, it creates it and it automatically kicks it right back into the system. So as soon as it finishes what it's doing up here, we're going to see all of those final images put together, and it's going to stick them right in line with the rest of them. So let's take a look with that in just a second. Okay, so we've got everything back in here, and you see now it's created what's called a DNG file. It's Adobe's native kind of compressed RAW format, I guess, without getting technical into it. Now, the cool thing about this, if you look right up here at the details, each one of these images on the longest side was 4896. Now, and 32 by 64. What we've done is we've changed the resolution of our image by stitching 4 of them together. We get all of the resolution, effectively making it a ton more megapixels. So these files get really, really big in a hurry. This one happens to be 9541 by 4279. It's a little shorter because remember we had to crop off some of the top and bottom areas that would have made it a little taller because I kind of messed up on the lining up of the images. Now compare that with this original one here. This is the standard 4896 by 3264. When we look at that, you'll notice the difference here. If I jump in, now this is unedited of course, but if I zoom in to 100% right here, you'll see that that's what we're getting. That's the level of detail, and it's still just rendering that. But that's the level of detail we're going to get, you know, as far as that center tree, or even right here, this tree that we were kind of treating as the focal point in this trail here. Now, if we change that real quick and we go over here, here's that same scene. Now, this scene was just a more standard panorama, but when I zoom in, I can get way in, and I've got lots and lots of detail to work with, so that if I want to, I can print this image huge. I mean, we're talking 5 feet long if you wanted to. Now that gets spendy to do, but we do have the resolution now because we've stitched everything together to be able to do that. So I'm not going to get into any further edits that I would make on a scene like this, as far as maybe adding some color toning and some different things like that. I'm going to leave this just as is, basically unedited, with just a few little corrections to things like, you know, the exposure, white balance, and just the very, very basics. This photo is basically untouched, and from here normally I would dive in and do a little more work, especially because we've got these nice golden tones where the light is splashing through, so it's really kind of cool. So this is one I may work on a little bit more. Okay guys, so that's a good point to stop for today. We'll jump in tomorrow to the larger image I made with the 45 different images, which I'll talk about more tomorrow. I didn't want this to get too long and boring on the editing side, so we'll pause here. This is the final image after I've made some adjustments and tweaks to it. Pretty happy with it overall, and so we'll dive into the rest tomorrow. You guys take care, have a good night, and I will talk to you tomorrow.